Okay, let's move along. Satan, in our last question, which was question 11, Satan persecuted the woman. He persecuted the church that brought forth the man-child who is Jesus Christ. Question 12. Using the prophetic rule of one prophetic day equals one literal year, found in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 4, verse 6. How long was this persecution to last? Go back into the book of Revelation, chapter 12, read verse 6, and we're going to read verse 14 as well. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. Now that, if you take a note at home, that's 1,260 days. A score is 20 years. Verse 14. And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle. Wings in prophecy symbolizes speed. So she was given 2 wings of a great eagle, which means that she flew very fast, that she might fly into the wilderness very quickly, into her place where she is nourished for a time, and times, and half a time from the face of the serpent. Now we found that the devil is also called that old serpent, Satan. We find this in Revelation chapter 12, verse 9. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan. And then over here in verse 14, she went and hid her face from the serpent. She was hiding from Satan. Satan was trying to kill the church. He was trying to get rid of it because he knew what it meant. And the woman had to go into the wilderness. She had 2 wings of a great eagle. You ever see a big great eagle? Its wings are huge. They're massive. Real huge. They can fly very fast. Not the fastest, but they can go real fast. So this woman, this church, had to go into the wilderness. If you ever go into a wilderness and you don't know your way around it, do you get lost?
Yes.
Yes, you do. So this woman went into hiding. This church, it was being attacked by Satan, persecuted. Therefore, the church had to go into hiding. It couldn't keep and maintain the teachings of Jesus Christ publicly. Because every time the testimony of Jesus Christ was publicly introduced, these people were persecuted to death. They were killed. And this took place for 1,260 years, and going by the calendar back according to the Hebrew calendar, there was 30 days per month. And if you added up a time, which is 1 year, a times, which is 2 years, that's 2 plus 1 is 3, and a dividing of times, that would be 6 months. If you had 3.5 years with 30 days per month, you would come up with 1,260 days, or you would come up with the figure 42 months. These numbers all equal the same amount. 1,260 days, 42 months, a time, times, and a dividing of times. 3.5. They all represent the same thing. 1,260 days. But we're talking prophetic time right now. We're talking about prophecy. And in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 4, verse 6, God says that He gives us each day for a year when we are studying prophecy. Therefore, it is not 100 or 1,260 days. It is 1,260 years. 1,260 years. When did this take place? This period of tribulation is repeatedly mentioned in the Bible because it is the worst ever to face God's people. Now, if you're taking notes, I'm going to give you some notes. Matthew chapter 24, verse 21. It is referred to as 1,260 days, 42 months, and 3.5 times or years. You can find in the book of Revelation chapter 12, verses 6 and 14. Revelation chapter 13, verse 5. The book of Daniel chapter 7, verse 25. All add up to the same 1,260 prophetic years. We're speaking in prophecy here. The two wings represent speed. Let's see if this is true. Let's go to the book of Deuteronomy, because I've given you biblical foundation for the others. Now I want to give you one for wings. Let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 28, and we're going to look at verse 49. Deuteronomy 28, verse 49 reads, "The Lord will bring a nation against you from far, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flies." As quick or as swift as the eagle flies. So, wings represent speed, the quickness. This tribulation is called, in the book of Revelation, chapter 12, verse 15, a flood of persecution. Let's see if we can get the Old Testament to back us up on this. Let's go to the book of Isaiah, one of my favorite books of the Bible, Isaiah. He's one of my favorite prophets. Let's go to Isaiah 59, verse 19. "So will they fear the name of the Lord from the west, and His glory from the rising of the sun, when the enemy will come in like a flood." When the enemy will come in like a flood. What is flood made out of?
Water.
Water. Flood is made of water. Let's go to the book of Revelation chapter 17, verse 15. Symbolically speaking, Revelation chapter 17, verse 15. If you're taking notes, this is important to take notes on. Revelation chapter 17, verse 15 reads, "And He said unto me, The waters which you saw, where the horse sits, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues." So what, when it talks about the flood in the book of Revelation chapter 12, what is it talking about? It's talking about a multitude of people. A multitude of people. History is clear that the papacy was the power which persecuted for 1,260 years. The period began in 538 AD, which if you go back in your history, you look at the historical documents, the Christian Bible-following Pope was pulled out of office in 538 AD. A new Pope was re-entered in his place, and he was the Pope Vigilus, and that is where it all started from, in 538 with Pope Vigilus. So in 538, when the papal power became supreme in Christendom, due to the letter of Roman Emperor Justinian, which acknowledged the Bishop of Rome as the head of all churches. I want you to remember that for our next meeting, because our next meeting is about the mark of the beast, and this will go right with it for documented history. This letter became a part of Justinian's Code, the fundamental law of the empire. The period ended in 1798 when Napoleon's general Berthier took the Pope in 1798 captive. At least 50 million Christians died for their faith during the period of 1,260 years. The Pope, the papacy, received its deadly wound February 15th, 1798, and it is documented in history. The Pope was taken into captivity. The Pope developed pneumonia in prison because the way the prisons were back then, the walls were cold, watery, moisture, not very healthy. Napoleon's general Berthier captured him, threw him in prison, charged him. He developed pneumonia in prison, and the Pope died. There was no more papacy after that Pope until 1920, when Mussolini gave back the power, and we're talking about the power, to the beast, which represents a kingdom, according to the book of Daniel, chapter 7, verse 23. A beast represents a kingdom. The papacy received its deadly wound in 1798, and in 1920 the deadly wound was healed. We will get into that in our future lessons, so keep watching. Question 13. I get carried away in that because I just love telling the truth about it. And I'm going to in our future lessons. Question 13, moving along. What did the church do when this persecution began? Let's go back to the book of Revelation chapter 12. And we're going to read verse 6. Revelation chapter 12, verse 6. And the woman, the church, fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. The woman fled into the wilderness, went into hiding. The word of God was not preached openly. The wilderness typifies the deserted and remote places of earth. God's people fled for their lives and hid in solitary places of the earth. Remember, during the 1,260 years, over 50 million Christians lost their lives because they would not give up their faith in Jesus Christ. We too nowadays must have that same faith. If you want to go home. If you don't want to go home, don't have the faith. It's yours to choose. I choose to go home. I choose to have that faith. The church dared not operate in the open, else its members would not have survived. God's true church did not exist openly as an organization from 538 AD to 1798 AD. And they all went into hiding. Bibles, if they were caught in the homes, the Bibles were cast out to the street and they would burn the Bibles. It's all documented in history, folks. I'm not telling you something new. We studied about this even back in school when I was younger. How they used to burn the Bibles out in the streets. How people were killed because they believed in Jesus Christ during the Dark Ages. That's what they call them, the Dark Ages. The Dark Ages lasted 1,260 years. You do the math. 538 to 1798. That's 1,260 years, just as the Bible predicted. Many wonderful Christians are members of churches which were organized and openly functioning between 538 and 1798, because remember, I told you Satan put his own man in power. Satan said, if I can't beat him, I'm going to join him. I'm going to start a faith. So if there's a true church, there's a false one. The true church could not openly hold worship during the Dark Ages. They couldn't. They would have been persecuted. All the other churches, which were false, they could hold worship. Of course they could. They were worshiping Satan and didn't even know it. Although they were good, true, faithful Christians, they just didn't realize, they just didn't know, because Satan didn't want people knowing what the book of Revelation said. During the Dark Ages, the book of Revelation wasn't taught. It was not taught. However, none of these churches can be God's remnant church, into which God is calling all His people today, because God makes it clear that His last church would not exist openly as a formal organization during this period. Now, God's remnant last day church. Let's look at some of the symbols of Revelation chapter 12, verse 17. Let me go ahead and read verse 17 of Revelation chapter 12. And the dragon was wroth with the woman. Satan was wroth. He was mad. Wroth means mad. He was angry. Satan was angry with the church and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God, all 10 of them, and have the testimony of Jesus Christ, the true teachings, not the interpretation of one's own private opinion. So, let's look at some symbols. Dragon is the devil, we found in Revelation chapter 12, verse 9. The woman is a true church, we found in question 5. The remnant, the last day or end time. Now, some people will be like, well, what's a remnant? For you homemakers who like to sew and things like that, when you go to a store, most women like to hit the remnant section, because that's where they're bound to find an exact duplicate of what they already have. So they go and they'll look in the remnant bin to try to match the same cloth that they're working with. And it's kind of funny, because when they make a spool of cloth, whatever goes on first comes off last. What goes on last comes off first. So, in the end is where we find the remnant. When you're at the end of that spool, that's when you come to the remnant section. And just like the true church back in the apostles' time, the disciples, the time of Jesus, just like there was a true, full-blown church, then there will be a remnant church that is identical to the church of old time. Yes?
So basically at the end we find the beginning.
Yeah. Yes. Now let's put the verse in today's language. The dragon, woman, remnant, commandments, testimony of Jesus. Let's put it in today's language. And the devil was infuriated with the true church, which is the woman, and went to fight against God's church in the very last days, which keeps the 10 commandments and has the gift of prophecy. Remember, we found in the Bible where it says that the gift of prophecy, or the spirit of prophecy, is the testimony of Jesus Christ. Moving on to question 14. What two characteristics of God's last day remnant church are mentioned in Revelation chapter 12, verse 17, and Revelation 19, verse 10? Well, let's take a look. What two characteristics? Revelation chapter 12, verse 17, I just read. We'll reread it. And the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God, and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. So, one of the characteristics is that they're going to keep the commandments. All 10. Not just a few of them. All 10. They're going to keep them and they're going to teach them. Revelation chapter 19, verse 10 reads, I fell at his feet to worship him, and he said unto me, See, you do it not. I am your fellow servant and of your brethren that have the testimony of Jesus. Worship God, for the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. So the two characteristics that this last church is going to have is that it's going to keep all 10 commandments, and it's going to teach the spirit of prophecy. So God's last day church will have the gift of prophecy and will keep all the commandments, including the seventh day of the fourth commandment. A lot of people will tell you, if you ask them, what's the fourth commandment? They're going to tell you, oh, I know, it is simple. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Well, yes. But that's not where it ends. That is not the whole fourth commandment. I want to read this. Let's go to the book of Exodus where we find the 10 commandments. Let's go to Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 through 11. This is where we're going to find the whole fourth commandment. Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 through 11 read, Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. That is what Satan's church teaches. And that's where Satan's church stops. But here's what God's church should and is teaching. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days will you labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it you will not do any work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your manservant, nor your maidservant, nor your cattle, nor the stranger that is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is. There's the seal of God. And rested the seventh day, wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. So if your church is not keeping the seventh day holy, you're in the wrong church. You can get mad at me if you want. It's not me you're getting mad at. You're getting mad at God. Exodus chapter 16, verse 8. Your murmurs aren't against me, they're against God. I'm just telling you what God says. You look at your calendar. If everybody has a cell phone nowadays. You in TV land. Pull out your cell phone. Pull up your calendar. What's the first day on your calendar? It's going to tell you Sunday is. What's going to be the last day of the week? The seventh day on your calendar in your cell phone. It's going to be Saturday. So according to Scripture, the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God, which means Saturday is the holy day. So if you're going to church on Sunday, you are wrong. You have been taught wrong. You have been misled. I urge you to go and keep the true Sabbath. Keep it holy. Because God's last day church is going to keep all 10 commandments, including the fourth commandment about the Sabbath day. There are many true Christians in churches which do not keep the Sabbath or have the gift of prophecy. However, none of these churches can be God's last day remnant church, into which God is calling all His people. God's church must qualify in both areas. There's 3 special messages. Here is something starting. Jesus assigns us 3 great points in proclaiming to all the world the everlasting gospel in these last days. Let's take a look at just a glimpse of them here. Let's go to the book of Matthew, chapter 24, and we're going to look at verse 14. Matthew chapter 24, verse 14. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then will the end come. Folks, we're living in the last days because the Word of God is in every country on this world. It's in every country. We just have to wait for every person to hear it. It's not too far off. But I want to go to Revelation chapter 14, verse 6. Let's see what Revelation has to tell us. Revelation 14, verse 6. And I saw another angel fly in the middle of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth,